There is nothing that is more video game-esque than leveling up. The core idea of gamifying the concept of experience while becoming stronger is something we can observe in various titles, mostly role-playing games, but not only. When leveling up your main character and their crew, you often get to see statistics like health, strength and stamina increase, and in addition perhaps obtain some sort of skill points to be invested in a properly named skill tree. Regardless of what happens specifically when getting a level in a game, one thing is for certain, you become stronger. Such progression may appear to be an afterthought. It is, after all, a non-skippable passive reward for playing the game. But I would disagree. I argue there is much more to learn when analyzing this mechanic in more detail, to understand the intricate mathematics hidden behind the flashing light. What goes behind the scenes, and what effect does leveling up have on the core game design? Are levels picked up at random, or is there a tune equation, a golden ratio, game developers follow to calibrate their rate of growth? How do levels actually work? First things first, roll the intro. Fairly recently, I completed a beautiful and enchanting Child of Light, a bit of a hidden gem developed by Ubisoft Montreal released well over a decade ago. The game is a fairly short role-playing game set in a fable, a fairy tale, painted and crafted in a very unique art style and rich in an engaging gameplay. As you might have guessed by the premise of the video, this title is a traditional RPG, with stats, skill trees, equipment and of course levels. My party members were around level 47 when I completed the game, with every level increase becoming ever so slower. But that makes me wonder, is there a fixed rate at which players reach higher levels? We're all aware that you usually need more time to get from level 59 to 60 rather than from level 5 to 6, but by how much is this rate? It can't just be a random number. Also, is this rule of thumb the same for all games? Let us go with order and look at one game at a time. Unfortunately for me, I was not able to get a table of XP for Child of Light, but as a basic example, we can take a look at a game more people are familiar with, Pokémon. If we graph out the required experience to reach every next level in various games, we should obtain an exponential curve. And that is exactly what we get. As confirmed by the wiki, medium-fast Pokémon obtain experience by following this very easy equation, x to the power of 3, or in other words, the level of the Pokémon cubed. An equation that has a perfect fit ratio of r squared 1. That is indeed quite convenient, and I must assume that most games have a very easy equation just like this one. And well, I wouldn't make this video if that was the case, now would I? I graphed other 9 different games that have a leveling system. Now in theory they'll use a polynomial of 2 or 3 degrees, but quite clearly they'll use different equations. Xenoblade 2 uses this very long looking formula, Fallout 4 instead follows this shorter trend line, and do not get me started on what on earth is going on Euro Truck Simulator 2. Why do all these games have such different equations despite generally following the same trend? Furthermore, not all games have a smooth transition. In The Witcher 3, experience is increased by steps of 1000, 1500 and 2000, while others like Borderlands 2 start off with small numbers like 300 to end up with 1 million. Games like Dragon Quest XI start off with a small sequence, 16, 44 and 93, while the first 3 levels in Valkyria Chronicles 4 starts much higher at 390, 1080 and 2290. If you look at the graphs of the few games I've researched, they kinda look similar, but the scales simply do not add up. Why is there so much inconsistency around the gaming world? Out of all the things that we could consider standardized by now, these graphs should be amongst them. And yet, here we are, not even agreeing how much experience a main character needs to raise to reach level 2. Looking at the raw data might not give the full picture. After all, we did not consider how much experience 2 enemies or quests give to the player in the first place. The final boss of a game generally gives more experience than the first Miitopia encounter in Route 201. To equate that would be squaring the circle, so perhaps we should change strategy. What if we compare the amount of time it takes to reach a certain level? All games will have the player start at level 1 after all, so if we correlate the average length of a game with the average level the players are when completing such a game, we might get some sort of alignment across titles. Think of it this way, if it takes a game 30 hours to beat, and the player usually reaches level 30 after defeating the final boss, such as the case for Miitopia, we can say that, on average, the player increases by 1 level by the hour. Sure, usually it is easier to increase levels in the early game than in the later stages, but we can still get an overall idea of the rate of incrementation. The only problem here is to collect the data to use. Everybody plays in a different playstyle, and it is not easy to pinpoint precisely when these 2 lines meet. While it might be a bit tricky to collect precise data, this is not to say that it is impossible and that it cannot be done with some methodology. For the average length of the game, I used How Long to Beat, a website that, as the name suggests, indicates how long does it take to the average player to complete a given title. I've cited this website multiple times in the channel, and occasionally I even post my own completion times in order to improve the dataset. The reason why I adore this platform is because it does distinguish between different playthroughs. If the player rushed the adventure, if they have done some side content, all the side content, a speedrun, and so on. For the purposes of this study, I will be selecting the times listed as main story and main plus side, since those imply your most expected ways to play video games. For the average level of completion instead, I just based it on either my own experience or the information shared on forums about other people's play sessions. This is of course far from perfect, and I wish I had a similar website to collect data from, but the margin of error of this method is manageable and it should work fine for our research. So, after collecting these two datasets, do we get a golden rule shared across the gaming world? The answer is surprisingly yes, at least for the games I've researched. Apart from two games I will soon reveal, all titles listed previously in the video have a similar average level per hour of gameplay. If we only consider the shorter average playtime, the ratio seems to be 1 level per hour. The longer average playtime instead, the one we called main plus side, reduces the ratio to a level every 2 hours. Again, there is a margin of error here, but it is quite evident that this proportion is much closer to reality than these equations. The two outliers are Nier Automata, which has a slightly higher level per hour of gameplay ratio, being somewhere between 2 to 3 levels per hour, and, ironically enough, Child of Light, which has an average of 4 levels per hour of gameplay. I cannot recall feeling this quote-unquote accelerated rhythm of leveling up when playing Nier Automata, but I did feel it when playing Child of Light. Perhaps that is the reason why I started to research this topic, to confirm that the game has a quicker level progression than usual. Do not get me wrong, this is by no means a negative aspect of the game. As introduced, I adore Child of Light, and I also enjoy Nier Automata. It is just an interesting observation worthy of investigation, and I suppose of your time watching this video. Nevertheless, the second set of results do indicate that there is a gut feeling on how often a player should level up when playing. This entails that designers are aware of this ratio and do intend to calibrate their titles in order to be within this window. The equation they use to determine how much XP is required to reach this goal vary greatly, but somehow they all get to this sweet spot. Keep in mind that an increase in leveling, as mentioned earlier, is a passive way to unlock new powers and skills, meaning that developers must be careful of not having players leveling up too fast nor too slowly. When a game presents such a system, the player needs to feel comfortable with the rhythm at which they progress. I suspect that, since the rhythm is carried over between games, it makes sense that games follow a similar trendline. It would be weird to play a game where the players level up every 10 minutes, to then play another where it takes hours to reach level 4. Of course, video games are not calculators. I do not believe that finding the perfect optimal equation is any game's designer's priority, regardless of what other games do, but it is curious to observe there is a consensus of what feels like a natural leveling up curve, one that I demonstrated it mathematically exists. Since levels are tools to guide players across an adventure, making this curve functional to the game can actually be an important detail. The scope of a level is often to maintain players in a predetermined path. When a player enters an area under-leveled, they automatically realize that they rushed content in the previous zone. This subtle yet clear communication between the level designer and the player should not be underappreciated. As we observe with graphs and tables, there is rationality in designing a well-made level-up system, a rationality that I truly admire and respect, something hopefully this video entails. Levels are a key part of gaming, both its history as well as its future. While they might not always be in the spotlight since their acquisition is automatic, levels are more complex than we might give them credit to, and studying this complexity made me appreciate them more. I was quite surprised to learn that there is no shared equation across the board when it comes to leveling up. However, I was also equally surprised to learn that, apart from few exceptions, there seems to be a golden ratio of 1 level per hour of gameplay, something quite remarkable that I don't believe many have spotted while enjoying their favorite gaming adventures, and if you did, let me know. If you made it this far, I wanted to thank you one too many levels times for watching today's video. I must confess that this video's premise is oddly specific, more than my usual videos, but I had to resolve the doubts I had when playing Child of Light, a game that I highly recommend. Were you aware of this complexity behind levels? I wish you all a wonderful day, and until next time, arrivederci!